Welcome to this week's edition of the Pete Mezzetti Show. I'm your host, Pete Mezzetti, sitting here with my guest this evening, who is Betsy Gara, who's the Executive Director of Cost. Betsy, welcome. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks, Pete. Glad to be here. Hanging in there.
Yeah, I know. This is not the lavish studios of Valley Shore Community Television in Westbrook, Connecticut, as people can probably tell.
No, but we're all learning these new technologies and new platforms. So
Absolutely.
Pretty soon we'll all be experts.
Absolutely. So Betsy, tell us a little bit about Cost and what exactly you guys do.
Sure. The Connecticut Council of Small Towns has just celebrated its 45th anniversary, and we're the only advocacy organization that is dedicated exclusively to representing the interests of small towns at the state capitol and before state agencies. So we have 115 members.
Okay.
Our members range from very, very small towns to some of the mid-sized towns. Westbrook is a member.
Okay.
And so we're always happy to get down to Westbrook and say hello to our local partners there.
Absolutely. And I'm sure another local member is our friend in Old Saybrook.
Yes, Old Saybrook, Carl Fortuna. He's been an active member and pleasure to work with.
Oh, he's a great guy. So what's Cost been doing during the pandemic?
Cost has been actively engaged with the governor's office on almost a daily basis. We've been working with the state agencies and the municipal attorneys to try to address some of the issues that towns are facing because of the coronavirus pandemic.
Right.
Things like, at this point in the process, towns were in the midst of developing their municipal budgets. So one of the first things that the governor's office had to address by executive order was, what do we do about the municipal budget process? We have a lot of communities in Connecticut that actually adopt their municipal budget at either a town meeting or a referendum, and clearly, given the restrictions on public gatherings and the concern about public health and safety, that wasn't going to be possible. So one of the first executive orders actually gave towns an additional 30 days to extend their budget deadlines. And this was important. It gave towns some breathing room so they could kind of sit back and see what this thing was going to look like and how long it was going to linger. And so the towns did extend that out. And now we've been dealing with executive orders on almost a daily basis, affecting all kinds of levels of local operations, everything from permitting, building permits, land use applications, town clerks functions, tax collection, you name it. There's just been, almost 26, 27 executive orders at this point. And they all touch on, at some level, municipal operations.
Exactly. Now let's talk about how, with what's going on, how it affects tax collection and the tax rate.
Right. Well, under one of the more recent executive orders, the towns had to pick one of two options. They either had to defer their taxes for 90 days, and most towns, the property taxes come due July 1st, and or they could choose a low interest rate program, which is a 0.25% every month or 3% per year, which is much lower than the typical 18% delinquent rate that towns can charge for delinquent property taxes. Or they could choose both. So at this point, the towns are required to notify the Office of Policy and Management by April 25th. So that's coming up quickly as to which program they're going to adopt. And this not only affects property taxes. In some communities with municipal utilities, it's also going to impact your sewer charges, your water bills, your electric bills, and so forth. Again, if there are municipal utilities.
Now, how many towns have municipal utilities in the state?
Most of the larger ones do have municipal utilities. So if you're looking at like a middle town, they have water and sewer. Wallingford, Manchester, Waterbury. There are some small towns that do have municipal utilities. For example, East Lyme has a municipal water department, and some of the others have water pollution control authorities that charge, that implement charges in that respect as well. So it's it is a big issue. I think towns are really nervous about how that's going to impact property tax collections in their community. We've been asking for municipal data as to the number of people that are filing for unemployment compensation benefits to give us an idea of really how it is going to impact the community. Is it going to mean a 10% drop in revenue? Is it going to be a 30%? We don't know at this point. And I think that's creating a lot of uncertainty on the municipal level and really giving us a lot of concern as to what this is going to mean for municipal operations going forward. There had been some, go ahead, Pete.
No, go ahead.
Well, there had been some discussion that, well, buildings are closed, schools are closed. Is there a lot of savings out there for towns? And it's really too early to tell if there's any savings. One of the requirements of the Federal CARES Act, which provides towns and the state with economic stabilization funds, is that the schools have to continue to pay their employees. They have to continue to pay for their contractors. So even though the buses aren't running, because they had bus transportation contracts in place, they're still required to pay them for the actual costs of the service. And so we're trying to figure out, okay, what does that mean? Are there any savings there that can end up leaving the school budgets in a better position for next year? Again, at this point, we don't know what that's going to look like. And there are towns that are very nervous that they're going to have to draw down their reserve funds, or they're going to have some cash flow issues. So I think you're going to hear a lot of talk about whether towns need to do some short-term borrowing to fill any of those gaps. Because regardless of whether or not they get the property tax collections, they still have to fund the delivery of those local services. And education, public safety, public health, all of those are funded primarily through the property tax.
Exactly. And now, how about the bond commission release of municipal aid?
Yes, finally. We were so thrilled that finally
I think the last time you and I were together, we talked about this.
Right. And so the last act of the legislature was that they approved the bond package on March 12th. That was good news. And then they had to wait until the bond commission actually authorized the release of that funding. And that funding includes town aid road funding, which for small towns is a big chunk of funding. It could be,
absolutely.
For a town, Westbrook or Old Saybrook size, and I'm estimating it could be about $200,000. Okay. They also approved the grants for municipal projects, which is the old manufacturing machinery and equipment pilot funding, and also local bridge funding. So that is some very good news. OPM indicated that the towns would have that money within a week. And so towns should be seeing that early next week, which again, it takes a lot of the pressure off of towns at this point when they're trying to figure out whether or not what their budget's going to be looking like for next year. And that money has been long overdue. So towns have been waiting for their town aid road money since last July. And it's a very short construction season because you have to pave the roads when the asphalt is available. You have to pave in the warmer months. Otherwise, you're going to have problems with disrepair. And so this is some good news. We're also going to be asking the governor's office to determine whether or not they can release some of the education cost-sharing formula money earlier. So typically, towns receive half their funding in October. We're hoping that we could get some of that money out earlier, maybe even as soon as July, so that towns that are faced with shortfalls because of property tax collections end up being able to enter into those contracts to continue to pay their school employees and make sure that our schools are ready to open when this pandemic is and the restrictions associated with it are lifted.
Exactly. And we my guest before you said, we don't know when schools could open May 20th. But that's
we don't know. Yeah,
we don't know.
We don't know. And everybody agrees that we have to put public health and safety as a top priority. And I know that people are getting frustrated, people are getting restless, but when all is said and done, we just have to make sure that it's safe for people to continue to operate. And when we start to talk about reopening businesses and schools, we just need to make sure that we can do that in as safe a way as possible. And that's the governor's office, I know, is talking a lot about that now. They have the Reopening and Recovery Committee. They've also engaged COST and some of our other partners like CCM and the councils of government in trying to talk now about recovery. What is recovery going to look like? What do we need to do to set the stage for economic recovery, but also recovery in terms of the long term? How do we change the way we operate to make sure that we're safe from this type of pandemic in the future?
Exactly. Now, how is this going to affect the state legislature? Are they going to go back into session? Is it going to be a special session, or who knows?
Well, currently on their website, the CGA website, it indicates that the legislature is closed until April 23rd, and they're reviewing that on an ongoing basis. There have been some legislators, I understand, that have actually tested positive and been sick because of the coronavirus. And so they're very concerned about the impact on the health of the legislators and the staff. So under the Constitution, the state Constitution, the legislature actually has to adjourn on May 6th this year. So my guess, I don't think they come back. I think they were talking earlier about holding virtual meetings. The bond commission meeting last week was held virtually, but I don't know that they've necessarily decided whether or not to do that at this point. The good news is we're in the second year of a biennial budget. So if they don't get to do the budget, we still have a budget in place. And then actually the governor's proposed budget didn't really change a lot in terms of municipal aid or other things. There was just some minor modifications to that. So I think we're in a good place, but I do think at some point there's going to be at least one special session to deal with some of the issues that the legislature needs to address before the end of the fiscal year.
Exactly. And I actually talked to our friend Joe DeLong the other day, and he's doing well.
Yeah, well, I've talked to Joe almost every other day, or at least on emails every day, because we're partners in this, and we need to make sure that we position Connecticut and our communities for a strong economic recovery, that we work together to meet the needs of our residents and trying to figure out and identify what those needs are going forward. So there's a lot that needs to happen. The good news is that there's a lot of communication going on. There's a lot of collaboration, and that is being done in a very civil way, a very inclusive way. And I think, the silver lining here is that we're all learning to work better together, regardless of party affiliation or whether you're from the city or a small town. I think that's an important lesson from this. And the other good news is that we're beginning to recognize the importance of technology and how we can use that not to replace the town meeting, which is a really historical hallmark of Connecticut's small towns, but to supplement it, to make it easier for people to participate in those town meetings and other meetings of the boards of selectmen, the boards of finance. So technology and transparency has really, I think, shined a spotlight on some of those issues that our local governments are dealing with. And I think people are going to come to expect that in the future, that they can log on and somehow participate in the meeting without having to leave their home or leave their kids, their family. And I think that's going to be a good thing.
So with what's going on, and obviously the fiscal year of 2021 about to start, how is that going to affect cost and what you guys do?
Well, we're not sure. We're actually having our executive committee talk about that now. What does that mean in terms of dues? Because as an advocacy organization, we rely on membership dues from our towns and from our associate members. Fortunately, cost dues have always been very minimal. Our dues don't exceed, at this point, $1,200 a year, which I
Okay.
think is a bargain for the amount of advocacy we do on their behalf. And so we're hoping that the towns recognize that we're still a tremendous value, but we are talking about whether or not we need to do some dues adjustment, recognizing that our towns are facing some very difficult and very uncertain financial times. And how do we do that? How do we make sure that we continue to operate as an organization and yet make sure that our members can continue to pay their dues and join as members? The other thing is,
Go ahead.
we also hold a lot of workshops and meetings, conferences, in order to educate our members about various issues. And we're fortunate that we have a number of our associate members that like to sponsor those events and exhibit at those events, and that helps us defray the costs of the advocacy organization piece. Unfortunately, we're just not able to schedule any of those at this point. We have been coordinating webinars on the various executive order provisions and working with various partners to make sure that we're providing them with information, but we're not charging for that. That's something that we're offering as a service to our members. And so we'll continue to do that.
Nice. You guys are busy, even though probably everybody's working from home.
We are, in some ways, I feel like I'm busier than ever before because we are on calls. We're on a call every morning with the Department of Emergency Management, the Department of Public Health, and all of the agency stakeholders every morning at 10:15 a.m. And we have meetings, virtual meetings, webinars that we're putting together. So we're in some ways busier than ever. The only piece is missing that we're not in Hartford every day as we usually are during this time. So, but the advocacy continues just in a different way. And it is good that we had those relationships going into this because we have been engaged with the governor's office and had that, have been able to be a very vital part of shaping the way that the state is responding to this on behalf of our local towns.
Now, how many towns do you guys work with?
We have 115 members currently. We also have a number of associate members that provides products and services to municipality.
Okay. So what's the difference between a member and an associate member?
Well, a member has to be the actual municipality.
Got it.
A small town, to be eligible for membership and cost, your population has to be below 35,000. And an associate member is a types of firms and organizations that provide products such as property restoration services, pumps, all kinds of engineering products and services. We have a number of law firms that provide services to municipalities and are very active associate members, and they've been a tremendous benefit to us as we begin to shape the response to this pandemic. We're also asking our associate members to provide us with information on how they're helping their customers comply and meet the needs of their clients during this time so that we can feature those on our website and in our electronic bulletins.
Nice. Now tell us, who's on the bond commission?
The bond commission, the governor controls the bond commission.
Oh.
And so the bond commission is comprised of the chairs and ranking members of the finance committee, because the bond, it's finance, revenue, and bonding committee, but also the state comptroller, the secretary of the Office of Policy and Management, the state treasurer, Sean Wooden, and I'm sure I'm missing others, but again, it's something that the governor sets the agenda, and he has been very concerned about the state's level of bonded indebtedness. And so, of course, they are trying to reduce that indebtedness, which has helped in terms of improving the state's bond rating, which
That's
means going forward there's lower bond costs. So I think that's a good thing. And one of the things, the governor was able to build up the state's rainy day fund. And I think there were a lot of people that were questioning, well, do we have too much in there? Do we really need that much in there? Well, we're in a much better position in this state because the state's rainy day fund was very well funded at this point. And so I think that is going to be a big help to us. We're also waiting to hear from the state as to how are they going to distribute the dollars that they're receiving from the federal government. Under the Federal CARES Act, the state is supposed to be receiving a lot of funding, and we're waiting to hear how that will be distributed to municipalities, what it will be used for, and kind of what position that leaves us in terms of our communities.
What types of things could it be used for?
Well, we're hoping that it could be used to supplant some of the funds that we've lost as a result of the property tax collections. Because even with the deferral and the low interest rate, there are going to be people, there are going to be businesses that are unable to pay their property taxes as a result. There's been a lot of restaurants that have indicated that they may not be able to reopen because they had a very thin profit margin, and this is a very difficult time. And in some cases, like in Westbrook and other shoreline communities, this is their big season. Absolutely. And they're going to have to hang on. What can we do to ensure that we get those resources into our community? So there have been some bridge loans. There's been some funding made available to smaller businesses, but it's been exhausted so quickly, which gives you a glimpse as to the size of this problem that we're facing in terms of our economic recovery. So I think, we just need to be careful about making sure that those resources go to where they're needed. Maybe it's to the nonprofits in our communities that are really stretched very thin and trying to assist in meeting the needs of people. But fortunately, the state is launching a local long-term recovery plan and asking communities to set up their own long-term recovery committees to begin to identify some of those unmet needs, some of the funding gaps in their community, and trying to figure out how we can work together either through the councils of government or with the state agency partners to address those needs. And so it's going to be a little bit of everything, I think. Again, making sure we get the resources where they're needed as quickly as possible. And we also have a group, the Advisory Commission on Intergovernmental Relations, that is looking at economic recovery. How do we position our municipalities to be strong partners in economic recovery? Part of it just making sure that we're pandemic proof, that we've addressed some of the issues like the hospital capacity, the healthcare capacity, and the issues in areas like airports where the transmission of this disease was so prevalent, but addressing those things and making sure that we're not going to be vulnerable again. And I don't know how you do that, but we have a lot of really smart people throughout the state that are working together to do that. We also have towns looking at, well, how do they change their operations going forward? Are there ways that we should organize our town halls so that they're not that they're maintaining certain distances in the offices? And I think we're all going to be looking at those kinds of things.
And I know for some towns, especially along the shoreline, during what's going on right now, they're not even open. They're open by appointment only. Right.
The town halls have limited access to the public because they need to protect against the public health, against any concerns created for the public health, but they are still continuing to operate. And so a lot of what they're doing is being done electronically, and I think that's a good thing. We've always posted a lot of information on the municipal websites, and I don't know how many people paid attention to it in the past, but now it's really important for residents to go to their municipal website on a daily basis and find out what is happening. What are they talking about? What are the issues they're facing in their community? Are there enforcement issues at local parks, for example, where people aren't practicing social distancing? Are there things that we can do as a community to address some of the other issues? So I think it's important that people get very engaged in their local government right now. This is a great opportunity. Everything now is being conducted virtually. You don't have to leave your house to log on and hear what the Board of Finance is doing or the Board of Education. And it's a great opportunity to educate yourself as to what our towns do and how many issues that they take action on that affect all of us. So in some respects, I think it could be an important lesson in democracy and something that people should not take for granted anymore.
Betsy Gara from Cost, thanks for some time, and we'll see you soon.
All right, great. Thank you, Pete.
Thanks, Betsy. On behalf of Betsy Gara, I'm Pete Mezzetti. Thanks, good night, and we'll see you next time.